This is an introduction to all design elements in the InterformNG2 Designer. In this session, I will list and describe all of these elements one by one. The first element on the list is a text. We insert a text with this one, and you can type in the contents of that email text immediately if it's a text constant. In the top, you can select the specific font you want to select for this text, also the size, and if it should be bold, italic, and so on. Other attributes for font, you can also install a style or define a style, like you can do, for instance, in Microsoft Word for the header and detail lines. Yeah, that's it. You can also set up the color and the filling the background color of this text. For the positioning, the text can be either, it goes for as good as all of the elements, they can be either placed in a dynamic position, means that we will place new text relative to the previous elements, and for text here we can also select multiple elements and change the size of all of the selected elements here. Right now these two elements here are text, but we can double click on an element here in this element list and look at the attributes, and you can see here right now we have for the position we have a dynamic position. In the top here we have currently a plain text from which is a text constant. It can also be a reference to data from the input file, and in order to do that I first need to load a file that I previously loaded here, so let's just do that. And here we have the XML or sample XML, and we can actually drop contents from this directly into the output, and then we have added a new text, a text that is an expression where we had here the path in the XML for that node. This can also be an XPath expression where we can use variables and calculations, substringing, concatenation. There's a lot of functionality hidden in this single option here, expression. What we can also do is that we can refer to a translation, so we can have an internal translation table with various keys, so it can be used in order to make a multi-language form, so that behind the scenes we have defined a simple text file with these keys, which is just a word on the left and the equal sign, and next to that we have the translation for these specific languages. So we can define multiple translation tables and that way make a design that can be output in multiple languages depending on whatever language we have set up here. And that language can be a fixed language, or we can also set up an expression, again an XPath expression, to dynamically select the language. Yeah, that's it for the text. For the text, it can also be, instead of a dynamic position, which is currently below each other, we can also drag any element here to a fixed position, so it has a fixed position. You can see here in this blue ribbon, and with the crosshair, Interform is indicating that this has a fixed position. If we want to copy an element, we can also do that with the clipboard options, copy, cut, and paste. And if I now have two fixed position elements and I use the Shift key or Control rather to select multiple elements, I could also here with the Shift select the first and the last to select multiple elements. Yeah, I just use Control, and then I can set up attributes for all of these, including for fixed position elements. I can align them to say, well, if you use the leftmost one or the top one, and so on. So in that way we can align fixed position elements. Yeah, and undo to undo the changes we just did. Here, what you see here is that we have a flow direction that moves from the top and down for all of the elements that has a dynamic position. Here for the page and for other containers, we can set that the flow direction should be horizontal instead of vertical. So it means that the text are now placed beside each other instead of that. And here, no matter what kind of flow direction we have, then we can use for each of the elements that has a dynamic position, we can use margins like in HTML. So we can say, well, there should be an extra margin on the left or top or bottom for this element, and when you have selected the element here, you can see margins marked out with this beige area. Yeah. For images, well, we can select images in two ways. We can drop them here from an input file and drop them into our output, or we can also go back here to our list of elements, and we have also the image element. See, it's right here actually, and we can here click and refer to an image that we have already installed. That's one of the ways where we can select an image from the installed ones. For resizing an image, you just draw in the bottom left corner, bottom right corner, and you can drag again. Image can both be dynamic and fixed positions like you saw before. So here for the container, we have again the possibility to put it in a fixed position. We can drag in the right corner to resize it, and this container can be used as a simple box. So with this we can activate a border. We can also activate a border on part of the container, and then we can set up the color of the border and the thickness of the border. On top of that, we have some attributes again here on the container. The same goes for the positioning. We also have here a dimension, which is also the case that we can set up dimensions for a text. And for the text, it means actually that is the area in which the text can be placed. And that was actually something that I should go back and describe here with a text. Let me add multiple words here. And for this specific text here, we can now set, well, that this text should only have a specific area. It should not be as wide in the dimensions. So you can see it will wrap. That's the default way of handling a long text in G2. Or you can cut off the wrap option so that it will cut the text and not do multiple lines of output. That's the two options when it comes to wrapping text here, which is set up here. This, I forgot to mention, is the line spacing of the text, so we can make it higher for each of the lines. Yeah, that's it. For image resize container, yeah, we're back to the container. I can select the element here or here and double click on the element in order to display the properties. Each of the corners of this box, that is the container, well, we can set these corners to be round, and you can set the roundness here by stating the radius of circle section that you're going to use. So you can do it partially round or more or less round. Also here for the container, you can set the filling to be a color, or you can set the lines of the container, again the borders, to whatever color you want. Set this first, for instance, and then change this. Yeah, I just showed the flow direction, and actually the flow direction is the same as well here for the container, because we can have elements inside of a container. So elements inside of the container, if we, for instance, cut these two and move them into this container, then they are relative to this container. So it means that if I move the container, then the elements inside of that container are moved with it. I can put elements into the container. I can also drag them out, so this is no longer inside of that container. You can open and close this, so you can see now it's again a part of that container. A line is the next element, so I can click the line element and then with the mouse state the start and ending point of that line. We can also set the thickness and the color, of course. For a line, it doesn't go into the flow. You cannot set a dynamic position because it has just some positions in the output, and these positions are then, which is the same as any other element, they are relative to the container in which they're placed. So this line here has, for instance, a position 2.875 centimeters from the left, and that is relative to where this container is placed. So you could add a bit over 1 centimeter to the position here of this line in order to calculate it, but you have it also displayed here in this ribbon. Another element is the barcode. The data that we want to put into the barcode is normally not a fixed constant, but you can type it in if you want that, and then it's a matter here of the question of which barcode are we going to generate. For instance, a code 128, and here in the bottom you see an image of barcode, how it should look with the settings that you have set up here. So it has some default settings, but we can increase the size and the height of this specific barcode. Then we can also set various 2D barcodes, and no matter what, normally we would not have a constant, but we would use an XPath expression to again select data from the input file or concatenate multiple fields into one large text into that barcode. Then here what I've done now is adding a lot of elements into the page, and this is actually the page element. And for this page element, you can set up the attribute. What paper size do we have? Well, often here it's A4. For US, we would probably select letter. And the question is then which rotation, do we want portrait or landscape? So we can select that here. The margins we have for a page inner margin, so we have 6 millimeters around the edge, which is set up here to be the margin. I could also move or change all of these values into 0. 6 millimeters is the default value, and the reason is because that is the normal unprintable margin on a laser printer. So we will use this often, but not always. For a page element, we would probably very often have a header and a footer, and then in the middle of the header and the footer we would have detail lines that could expand to multiple pages. So if there's not enough room on a page, then we will generate a new page output. And we can here on the page, if I right click here, I can add new elements inside of that page. That's another way of adding elements. And here I want to add a header, and right click again and add a footer. So now we have divided the page into the header, body, footer section, where what we previously had in the page it has now gone into the body section. So now if I want to reserve some space for the header, I could use any element that has a dynamic position, and then it will push the remainder, actually the body section, downwards. Here I've added a container, and now with the mouse I can drag it down to reserve some space for my header. And here for the footer, I could do the same, adding another container here. I could do that this way and drag downwards, and then I've reserved some space for a footer. And of course in the header and the footer I could then insert some elements that are to be inserted always on these elements. So whatever elements is inside of the header and the footer will be repeated if we have a page overflow. We also have the possibility to use what we call components, and the components are elements that we want to reuse for many output pages. So what I can do here is to include a component. So we go, it looks like this, and what you can do is to refer to some of the standard components that are delivered with Interform, or you can create your own. Let me just see if I can find some here. No, we just take no, that's a header, so bad idea. Let's take a footer, this one, and insert. So that's a demo component that I have inserted. I can now drag it up a bit to put it into the physical page. For this, it should have a dynamic position, and then I could set it to have a fixed height to reserve, I don't know, like 3 centimeters, 21 centimeters wide. And now we have defined this area down here to be fixed. So that we have fixed elements within a container that has a dynamic position, and that way it has protected the detail lines from going down here. I just used one of our demo containers. I can convert this after I've made some changes into my own component. So I can do that and save it here as a new component. Let's just call it footer, demo footer, and save it. So it means that now this is a component, a part of my design that can be used for many of my outputs. Repeat. Yeah, that's a typical thing that we would want to do here in the body section. So if I want to repeat something, what I can do is that I can specify a number. If I want to repeat something 5 times, then I can add the elements that I want to include 5 times inside of that repeat. For instance, adding here some text. It's not shown directly here in this result view, but if we do a PDF preview, then we can see the final merge result, and we have multiple text here that was repeated 5 times. And this is actually, let's see why it's doing it like so, but it seems to be repeated in the horizontal direction. So it seems that's because we had the horizontal flow in the body, but we can change it into a vertical flow, and then these 5 repetitions are actually shown below each other, like so. Yeah, another use, which is normal use for a repeat, is to repeat something for the input file. So if we search for detail line, we have a subtree with detail lines, and then we can say, well, we want to repeat something for each detail line, and then we could add, let me just show you here, a table, which is one way to add columns. So we have multiple columns here. It's a little bit hard to see. Let me add some borders to that, and then we can drag from the detail line here, drag the data from our input file into that. And then each time I drag something, as you saw previously, then my mistake. Let's just go back once more and then drag it directly here into the cell. I just didn't click it right. So we have here a repeat loop and a table, and within the table we can have multiple columns. I define that when I create the table, and then inside of that we have a multiple cells, and the text here inside of here now has an XPath expression to refer to the relative node within that repeat loop. Interform detects that we are in a repeat loop, and if we refer to a node inside of that node that is repeated, then we get the relative path. Yeah, so it means that well, we only see a single entry here, but if we do a preview, then you can see the final result where Interform has iterated across all of the input nodes. For any repeat, it's important that the text here, they are placed, or actually the table is placed in a dynamic position. Another thing that we can do is that we can use conditions, and normally conditions would then look at the data of the input file. So we can, for instance, refer to this one and say, well, if this is equal to a text, and then we can use the and or in lowercase because it's XPath functions to use multiple conditions, and this is normal Boolean expressions. And if this condition is true, then we have, like we saw with the repeat and the container, we can insert something inside of that condition by dragging it into that. And now this will only appear if this condition is true. Well, we could also negate this to say not equal to, and then it would be something like this. And then we have this text here, which now appears in that put. Similar to a condition, we have a more advanced. We have the select when. So select when you can set up multiple conditions. Let me just take one condition here to say, well, let's compare this node with ABC, and then when I click apply, then you can hopefully see that we're now building up a tree. And the select here, it's similar to a condition, except that we can have multiple threads. We can have a when branch, multiple when branches. We can add another one with the right click. Say when if A is less than B, or we should actually refer to a constant here with a quote around it. So if this is true, then we can do something else. So we have a complete decision tree where the select will look at the conditions from the top to the bottom, and the first time a condition here, the first of these conditions that is true, all of the elements for that condition will be executed, and none of the other when branches or otherwise below will be executed. The otherwise branch here will execute only if none of the when branches above are true. Yep, there's a lot of things to explain here. I did quickly show you the table, and I can do it again. You can drag actually here to specify a certain number of rows and columns. And when you have done that, then you have these rows, and inside of the rows you have the columns and so on. And you can, by right-clicking here, insert a row or a column relative to the one that you have selected. For the table here, you can also resize the complete table. It will resize all of the columns and rows inside. And to make it a bit clear, you can also activate borders. And we can even merge cells here. If I select multiple cells, select these two cells, and then I can merge cells, and I can also unmerge them if I want. Yeah, and inside of a table, we can also, by right-clicking on a row or a column, we can say that this should be repeated, like you saw the repeat loop before. So we can do that also, and also we can also have a condition for either a row or a column. Variables, yes, we can use variables here. There's a lot of mess here in this design, so perhaps I should just create a new one. So let's make a completely new blank one. Let's define a variable first, which you can call a counter. Start out with the value 1. I drag it before the page element, and then inside of the page we want to add a repeat loop. We want to print out all of the values from 1 to 100. And so for this we want to do a repeat loop of 100. And inside of that repeat loop we want to print out the current value of our variable. So we can find the variable up here, apply. So now we need to also specify that the variable here should be increased for each iteration. So we can do that by referring to the name of the variable, and this is case sensitive. And for the expression here, we can set up counter. So this expression here actually is the same as stating counter is the same as counter plus 1. So this is just a description field. It's a very good idea to use descriptions in order to explain what you're doing in a function, and you can also use a comment here for your own use and also for colleagues in order to describe what is happening in this specific area. So here, if we do a preview again, we can see that we are printing now all of the numbers from 1 to 100, and we have a page overflow, which again, like we saw before, we can add a header and a footer, and then we can add a container inside of each in order to reserve some space, and perhaps we can also make this a box in order to make it quite visible that we do have a container here, and make this a box with a border as well. And now let's do another PDF preview and could see the header and the footer. The conditions can also be used, of course, in the header and the footer, so that we can have a flexible header. So sometimes we want a large header and sometimes we want a small. So a condition here could be to use, let's say, an if. A condition could be to look at some of the built-in functions that we have. So we have for XPath, we have a lot of standard functions that you can search on the web, but we also have extra ones, including page number, which indicates what is the current page number. So it's page 1 out of, and then the total number of pages. That's another function that you can also use here. So we could say here, if the page is 1, then we want to include this container and do something else. So that's one way of adding a condition inside of the header or footer. For the standard XPath functions, you can do concatenating, substringing, search and replace, either for a complete string or for a character. So there are a lot of more advanced stuff in the whole library of XPath. One element here is called template, and the template here is actually a function that also has some properties. I just double clicked on it in order to show you the settings, and one of them could be that you would want to set up the language. You remember perhaps the translation files, to set up the language via an expression. So it means that we could set up this language once here in the main template and just refer to the default language on all our text to make a form or a design that would work for multiple different languages. The final thing I would like to show are here the settings. For the designer, there's a few settings here that you can set up. What is the default behavior when you create a new design? Which language would you prefer? Which measurement unit would you want to prefer? What normal size of the paper would you prefer? And also what margin would you then like to start out with? You can change that later if you want. And finally, all of the resources that I've used here in the designer, they are found here in the library, where I can upload various elements, for instance here images, and I can create a folder structure with folders and subfolders, and that is the same for templates, our designs, documents, input files, XML files, and fonts and so on. Yeah, long, quick talk, introduction to the InterformNG2 Designer.